thought we'd just get stuck in straight away.
Yeah.
You identify the concept of the regressive left as one of your primary antagonists. Could you elaborate on this more and specifically define who you categorize to be in this group?
Sure. All right, good first question. First, just very briefly, I just want to say this is an honor of honors to be here with you guys. There's just something incredible happening in not only my country, but your country and truly all over the world. People coming together over ideas, whether we agree or disagree. I suspect we'll have some agreement and disagreement here today. I've already taken some great questions upstairs. I do want to say one other thing before I start, which is I care about one thing truly, which is freedom. You have the right to live free. You have the right to live as you see fit. Whether I agree with you or disagree with you, I will defend your right to live as you see fit. And that's what a free, especially Western society is supposed to be all about. Obviously, I believe that classical liberalism is the best roadmap to get us to maximum freedom. But I'm happy, you said libertarian in the intro, and I think we can talk a little bit about the distinctions between classical liberalism and libertarianism and all that. But basically, freedom is the only thing that matters. That is the only thing. If you want to live your life, if you want to make decisions for yourself, for your family, for your community, freedom is the only way to get there. And I believe limited government and the capacity to own your own mind and make decisions for yourself using your rational, logical mind, which is what we have, what most of us have up here. I think that's the way to get there. Now, as for regressive left, for the record, I did not come up with the phrase regressive left. People credit me with it all the time. Majid Nawaz, one of your countrymen, did come up with the phrase. I think that partly why I use the phrase so often, and I actually don't use it that much anymore, but why I used it so often in that first year of when my show kind of got put on the map was that I come from the left. I mean, I was a progressive. I was on the Young Turks network. We were very much part and parcel of sort of big government, identity politics, all the things that I now talk about from the other side. I mean, I really was part of it. And it was known as progressive, meaning we're for progress. And the inherent problem with saying that you're for progress is everyone in this room would say, well, are you for progress? Of course you're for progress. It sounds good. You want to progress. Okay, it just sounds good. And this is one of the things that the modern left has done really well. They've done the branding thing well. So you don't really have to think really that hard. Well, if someone says you're for progress, of course you're for progress. But the real question is, what are you progressing to? And after being part and parcel of the left for so long, what I realized was they weren't progressing, they were actually regressing, because identity politics, which really is the key to this whole thing, and I think everything that's sort of wrong with modern discourse, and that we should judge people on their immutable characteristics, and that your sexuality should matter more than your thoughts, or that the color of your skin. I mean, I can look at you guys and there's different people of different shades, and I'm sure there's different sexualities here and obviously genders. Think how patently absurd and actually truly prejudicial, because prejudice is to prejudge, it would be if I was to think that I know what you should think because of the way you look or the way you were born or some other immutable characteristic. It is the antithesis of every reason that you guys are at such an incredible school here. Look at these books around you. It's about learning, but it doesn't say you're supposed to learn this if you're black, and you're supposed to learn this if you're gay, and this if you're Muslim, and this if you're Christian. It's absurd. And yet somehow this line of thinking has infected virtually all of the modern left. And the reason I focused on it so much is because it's not just some sliver of people. It's affected the left in terms of the media. It's affected the left in terms of what's going on academically and professors and schools. And I truly, without hyperbole, I view this line of thinking as the single greatest threat to the West that exists. That it will destroy the West, not with bombs, but we will truly rip apart our free societies. And we'll do it ourselves in the name of tolerance. And that's why I talked about it so much. I don't say the phrase that much anymore because I think, I think especially young people, like labels are becoming increasingly meaningless. And right now I have so many allies that are conservatives, and I'm a classical liberal, but that's so close to libertarian. And I also don't want to use it as a pejorative. So it's obviously a pejorative at some level, of course. There's a mockery of their phrase. And I try not to do that. And I think also, more than anything else, for the first year or so that I was talking about this so much, I was one of the first people that had come from the left and said, no, this isn't working anymore. And I felt I needed a phrase to identify it, because there's a reason that people have phrases for things, and occasionally you'd have to use something for a while to encapsulate what something actually means. And it kind of worked, and I think a lot of people get it right now. I suspect most of you guys get it. So I try not to use the phrase that much anymore. I think you asked some specific examples.
As in who you'd categorize into that label?
I really try to talk about ideas and not people. So I would say if you believe in identity politics, if you believe the reverse, literally the reverse of what Martin Luther King Jr. said, that he wanted his children to grow up in a world where they weren't judged on their color of their skin, but by the content of their character. If you believe that we should be judging on the color of someone's skin rather than the content of their character, or more importantly, the ideas that they put forth, then you're part of what I would call the regressive left. And unfortunately, that has infected the entire Democratic Party. Now, the right, by the way, has problems with identity politics too. I think conservatives basically have done a better job of managing the far right. These people that want America to be a white supremacist nation or some sort of ethno-state or something like that, which is so the reverse of what America is and what it has always stood for. That I don't find that they have institutional power, which is why I don't find that I need to talk about it all the time. The ideas of leftism and collectivism, really, and identity politics, they've infected everything, and that's why they have to be fought, because they have to be fought not only at the academic level, but they have to be fought in media, they have to be fought in television, and really anywhere you can find them, because they will undo the ground. They will take great institutions and crush them in the name of tolerance. And I would prefer that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think a lot of what you said, I think the audience and myself will sort of unpick. So firstly, to start with,
sure.
The idea that you said you're a classic liberal as opposed to a libertarian. What do you see as being the difference? And then what sways you more then to being associating yourself as a classical liberal?
So it's funny, I hope this won't be the only time I come here, because if I come back in about a year, I may tell you that I'm a libertarian, because here's the deal. So I would say what a classical liberal is basically is if you believe in the individual and you believe in limited government, and in the case of the United States, that you believe in states' rights, and that you believe basically in laissez-faire economics, and that it's your right to do with your life whatever you see fit. And as long as the government protects your property and your livelihood and your life, my neighbor is allowed to think whatever he wants. My neighbor may not like gay people. Okay. My neighbor, may think all sorts of horrible things. We have a fence between our house. As long as he doesn't cross over that fence, we're basically okay. I would like to change someone's ideas who, if they were a bigot or a racist or something. But in effect, the government is just supposed to make sure that we're not killing each other. I mean, that's really the most simple way to put it. Now, I would say that the real difference, and we've done this a bunch on my show, including last week with Don Boudreau from George Mason University, I would say that the real difference between a classical liberal and a libertarian is that I do see some utility for the state beyond just making sure that the states aren't warring with each other and protecting our borders. I think there are some things that, when done correctly, the state can do. Unfortunately, the state doesn't work that well. And that's why at the moment I'm always preaching the ideas of limited government, and I suspect if I was to take all of my thoughts to their logical conclusion, that I don't think I could really make a meaningful distinction between classical liberalism and libertarianism. Basically, it's just about how much government do you say is okay. So we've got libertarians, if you guys see the American Libertarian Convention, you get these naked, screaming people that are arguing about driver's licenses, and it's like, that's just silliness. I don't want to live in Mad Max, I kind of would like to live in Mad Max, actually, but it's really just about where do you draw the line? And then you can even go further than libertarian. I mean, you can go to these anarcho-capitalists who want absolutely everything privatized. To me, it's a utopian idea at some level. I don't think it could really work, and I'm not interested in disassembling the state to that point. I would say this, I think it was Peter Thiel, this was privately, once said to me that he wouldn't be a libertarian if it all worked. And I think that really is the thing that makes the most sense to me. If the government was a slim, trim operation that didn't need to endlessly take from us and the goods and the worth and the money that we bring into society, if the government did things more right and did it effectively, ran the government as if it was a slim, trim business, well, then nobody would want to be a libertarian, because you'd go, wow, this is all working and everything's pretty great, and you know what, maybe I'll give a little bit more because I can kind of see where it's going. But instead we have this giant bureaucracy that nobody knows where your money goes. Nothing that the government really does is done effectively. And even look right now, I mean, Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars. Warren Buffett is working on a healthcare plan for his employees with Jeff Bezos from Amazon. So I think especially now, because you're all holding the world in your pocket on that phone, the power has been given back to the people. And now it's our responsibility to figure out how to use that power responsibly. I think that was sort of like what Uncle Ben said to Peter Parker. So there you go.
Kind of on the tangent then about talking about liberalism and progressivism in general, sure. And sort of you've often spoken about how these two ideologies have changed and how they've almost become a race to, I think, what you coined as the highest rate to victimhood. What do you think is actually driving this change?
Look, the ideas of identity politics, as I said, where you judge people on their immutable characteristics. So for example, we just met 10 minutes ago. I don't know what your background is. I can only look at you and I can ascertain a few things. But if I was to think, okay, your skin is darker than mine, I should know what your politics are, or I should know literally anything about you other than you strike me as a very thoughtful person and I'm enjoying this conversation, that would be insane. I mean, that would be insane, but they've tricked us. In a modern sense, the left has tricked us to say, okay, if you're gay, you're a little oppressed, but if you're a white gay guy, you're a little less oppressed than a black gay guy. And then if you're a Muslim, you're oppressed this much, and if you're trans, you're oppressed this much. And then there's this idea that I'm sure most of you guys know about intersectionality, that somehow, if we can combine all of these oppressions, you know, it's like you're creating some sort of super transformer that will be stronger together. You know, like Devastator. I'm glad that reference worked on you guys. Wow, all right. I'd rather talk about the Transformers, but we can do this. But they think that by taking all of these oppressed groups, that what you can do is you can mix them all together and that you'll have some sort of superpower. But you will actually have the reverse, because if you view your victimhood as virtue, you will always want to be more of a victim than anyone else. And victimhood, guys, this is probably the most important thing that I'll say this entire time. Victimhood is not virtue. Yes, some of you grew up with more. Some of you have a limp. Some of you are gay. Some of you are black. Whatever it is, it does not matter. What you are supposed to do as a human is take charge of your life. Figure out what your, can I curse? Shit is. Figure it out. Figure out what your shit is, and then go, all right, you know? Look, everyone in this room, I would guarantee you that almost without exception, but please correct me if I'm wrong in the Q&A, that almost every single one of you have it better than your grandparents had, and certainly better than their parents had and before that. That's real progress. But it's not progress because it magically happened. It's progress because freedom has taken root here, and that is an incredibly beautiful thing. So all the government should do is facilitate to make sure that there are equal laws for everybody, that you don't get to take more from some people because they had a little bit easier, or give more to some people because they had a little bit harder. Now, there's ways we can address some of those things. I would say that the way to address real inequalities are that we should be funding the best education we can fund. That, to me, is the only answer. But the idea that we're going to punish certain people, or I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with the lawsuit that James Damore has over at Google. I mean, they literally were putting it in HR handbooks that they were not going to hire white or Asian engineers. Really think about that. You're going to say, because of someone's skin color or ethnicity, we are not going to hire them. Now, I get it. The idea behind that was we'd like to help other people who maybe have been underrepresented as engineers, and that's a lofty idea, and it sort of sounds like progress. We're going to hire people who have been underrepresented. But what you actually start accomplishing is that you will hire people not only who are less qualified, because you're going to say we're going to have to take people who are less qualified, if in this case the white and Asian engineers were the most qualified. And any business, hopefully you guys will all have great businesses when you get out of here, if you want to have a great business, or you'll be in academia or whatever else you want to do, but you're going to want to hire the best people. Not because of their skin color. That is prejudice. Imagine if you had a heart attack tomorrow. Would you want the best doctor, or would you want a doctor based on some immutable characteristic that got him the job, that probably also got him into the college before that and perhaps the school before that? Of course the answer is no. That's the honest answer. It's a tough answer, but that's the honest answer. So I would say the way to deal with some of the inequalities is through education, but this positioning of that our victimhood will make us stronger together is actually, especially for America, which I think has done multiculturalism better than any Western society in the history of the world, where everyone, this is a funny thing, we get this out of the left all the time, how much they hate America, and then they also want open borders, so I guess everyone could share in the horror that is America. And it's patently ridiculous. And we should want equal laws for everybody, and then within that is what empowers you as an individual to go out and get what's yours. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you should have every opportunity to get it, and then the rest is on you. And any other system that's going to try to rejigger some things so that it's going to be easier for these people and less easy for these, and try to magically make a perfect society. As Eric Weinstein said on my show, every time a society is tried for utopia, it gets dystopia.
Then kind of on that tangent, the idea that education could be the first step to a more equal society, how would you then navigate the problem that comes with an educational institution? For example, Oxford, one could argue, where BME students are underrepresented when it comes to the application process. If it's not through then schemes that encourage these communities to apply, how do you suggest to navigate around that issue?
Yeah. So I don't know about that specific example, so I don't want to comment on that. But what I would say is that we shouldn't be looking, look, if you took the entire country here and you were to break it down by ethnicity or whatever, or sexuality or whatever, imagine if those quotas were really what got you guys to school. Some of you would not be here right now. Would that be fairer? I don't think that would be fairer. What you would want to do, I think, is you want to get education to be at the most local level possible, but really good education, not just teaching for the test so that people can move higher up and so they can memorize certain stats, or I'm sure all of you guys did this in high school. You would ask your teacher, well, do I have to know years or something? Do I have to, and it's like, that's not what an education is. What you have to try to do, I think, is get as much. You want to use money effectively so that schools actually are teaching logical thinking, critical thinking more than anything else. And then, yes, may it turn out at the end of that, if everyone had basically the same access, school choice is a great example, and vouchers. People should have as much access to good education. And by the way, this is somewhere where I think the government does have a role. So there's a lot of libertarians, obviously, that don't want the government in education at all. I would say that I'm the product of public education, for better or worse, and I went to good grade school, and I went to good junior high and a blue ribbon high school, and I went to the State University of New York at Binghamton, all public schools. So I know it can work. I studied politics, so something must have gone right here, So I think you have to reform it to the point where we shouldn't have federal bureaucracies like the Department of Education that's trying to impose just massive. We have, in America, for example, we have about, 350 million people, 400 million people. You have to kick that back to the states and let the states decide what's best. And then the counter argument I always get to that, by the way, is that, people say, well, wait a minute, if you took a state like, a southern state like Alabama, well, they'd want to teach creationism. Well, perhaps they would, but I would argue that as time goes forward, I believe that the truth does win out. And that the more opportunity you give, if the states are actually a marketplace, which is what the founders in America wanted, the more that, you go, some of the Connecticut in the north, they've really respected science and education and all that. I'm just picking a state. You're going to get more people moving there. And then Connecticut might raise taxes, and then more people are going to go, I don't want to pay those taxes for that education, and they might move to Texas, and then they'll get to Texas, and the taxes will be low, but they'll go, all right, my taxes are low, but my education's not great, but I have more land here. And then it's on you. This is the true beauty of the American system, is that you can use, as Randy Barnett, who's been on my show as a constitutional law professor at Georgetown, and he's argued in front of the Supreme Court, he said, you can use your foot vote. If you don't like what is happening in your community, go somewhere else. But the second the federal government starts making laws for everybody, if you don't like it, you got to leave the country. And that's much worse. So again, this is where I would always go to local control of things.
On then talking about educational institutions, I think now more than ever on like college campuses, the idea of safe spacing and not platforming is a buzzword that's very prominent. Would you ever not host a speaker, for example?
Well, I think everyone has a right to free speech, and I hope during the Q&A you guys are welcome to ask me anything that you'd like. I don't think everyone has a right to a platform, or I know that not everyone has a right to a platform. You don't have to invite anyone here, and you don't have to sit here to listen to anyone. So that's up to the organization. Now, I would say that a school, a public school especially, private schools it's a little bit different, but in effect, if a public school if a student group invites somebody, then the school has a responsibility to make sure that event can happen peacefully, and that protest, of course, is allowed. Protest is the most free thing that there is. You are supposed to use your voice to express your thoughts. But you can't violently protest, you can't call in bomb threats, you can't pull fire alarms, you can't create human walls to not let other students in. These are all things that happened to me when I spoke at UCLA with Milo. Now again, Milo is intentionally a provocateur, so I don't agree with all of the things that he says, absolutely. But if the student group decided that he can speak, it's incumbent on the university to protect his free speech. And so this idea of safe spaces and trigger warnings, look, they can, again, I'm a freedom guy. They can do whatever they want. If you guys have a room of puppies or whatever is out there, like, great. Well, great, I guess it's not great, but you can have your room of puppies. I'd like to see the room of puppies, but in effect, what you're doing is actually the reverse of why you guys are here. You are here to learn how to think. This is what an incredible school you're at. I mean, just in the hour that I've been here, I mean, this is truly incredible, and I hope you guys really understand that. And if they take away your ability to hear different thoughts in school, you don't magically get braver. You don't magically get smarter when you work out, you get into the real world. Now you got a job and you got kids and a partner or whatever you got. You're not going to magically also go, now I should challenge my mind intellectually. You won't. Do it here now. And the more people that are trying to protect you from scary ideas, they're actually not protecting you. They're sheltering you. And if anything, they're really trying to control you. So not everybody has a right to speak. Well, everyone has a right to speak, but not everyone has a right to speak here. It's up for you guys to make wise choices. And in the cases where maybe you invite somebody that some of the people here aren't happy with, they can protest. But I would say more importantly, come listen and make a good point in the Q&A and show this person why they're wrong. But just shouting them down actually strengthens all the bad forces out there.
So that's kind of the idea of a platform. But then do you think specifically in a university, the idea that some groups might not be able to have the empowerment to voice an idea because they feel marginalised, that for that group, in order to promote freedom of thought, in order to promote ideas, they need that safe space?
Can you give me an example that might help me frame this? I'm not quite sure.
Like perhaps an LGBTQA group that felt at university they were unable to perhaps fully express themselves, and they'd like a safe space in their college campus to do so, and to have that discourse they feel they could only have if it was within like a safe space sphere.
Right, so I don't want to get lost too much in, look, every group can decide what to do. I mean, look, I believe in the individual first, but groups form out of individuals. If all of you are individuals and you truly are learning what you think and want to surround yourself with other people who will challenge your thoughts or maybe not challenge your thoughts, but individuals create groups. So if there was an LGBT group here that felt they wanted a room to meet in once a week where they didn't want straight people or something like that, I would say that's probably not the best way things should be done, and I think it would ultimately cause more division. But again, I'm a freedom guy, so I'm not opposed to them doing it. I think this is why you guys are probably in all sorts of different groups, you know what I mean? You're not gonna force somebody who doesn't love basketball to be in a sports group. I mean, this is where you just have to go to maximum freedom. So if a group wants to do that, fine. And by the way, if those guys then, if there's someone that you guys brought here who happened to be anti-LGBT or something, then they should protest. But you just can't protect people from ideas. You can't. You will end up taking out every good idea in the process.
Thank you. A recent New York Times profile identified you as a member of the Intellectual Darkweb. What did you think?
Yeah, this is like a superhero movie. Yeah,
of kind of being categorized into that label.
Well, it's kind of funny. I said to some of the guys in the Q&A earlier, there's the old joke, like I would never want to be in a club that would have me as a member. And I do feel that a little bit with this because, this crew of people, whether it's, Joe Rogan, who's a comic and an interviewer, to Eric Weinstein, who's a mathematician and an economist, and his brother Brett, who's a biologist, and Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist, and Christina Hoff Sommers, who's sort of an old school feminist, and the list goes on and on with these people. The reason you guys know most of us. The reason I'm here is because all we have tried to do for these last couple of years is have some difficult conversations with some people we disagree with. That's it. I have never once heard any of these people say anything hateful or bigoted. Have they said controversial things? Have they talked about some tough truths? Have they been wrong about things? And I include myself in that? Absolutely. But this crew has just tried to say, wait a minute. Most of these people actually are from the left. I would describe most of them as sort of disaffected or classical liberals. Mostly, not everybody, because there's a guy like Ben Shapiro's in there, and he's definitely a conservative. But I would say, look, the best way I can describe this group is take Sam Harris on the left, okay, and Ben Shapiro on the right. These guys disagree on literally every topic there is, not only from the existence of God and the most existential questions of the universe, to every political thing that you can think of, from abortion to taxes and down the road, probably states' rights and foreign policy, everything. And they're allies now. And that's incredible, because why are they allies? Because they're defending their right to live in a free society with people they disagree with. And that's what's been lost. I think we've lost it in America because the tenor of our political system has become so hysterical. I think you guys have probably lost it, perhaps to a lesser degree, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But the idea that we don't have all the answers, we're going to sit with people and argue what our ideas are, and we're not going to shout them down. I had Ben Shapiro on my show. Ben is not really for gay marriage. He sort of takes the libertarian approach. My studio is in my home. I live in my home with my husband. Should I now berate him and belittle him and all that? I just did his show. He has a new interview show that I guess he stole from me. I think I came up with the interview. But I just did it it just came out yesterday. And in it, he believes that being gay is a sin. I just don't care. You know what I mean? I just don't care. I'm not that thrilled with his sex life. So it just doesn't matter to me. I'm not forcing him to do anything gay, and he, well, that would be kind of funny though. But that's the point. We live in a free society. He doesn't have to believe everything I believe, but he has to defend my ability to live as a free human being, and that's what I have to do for him. So, yes, I think this is an interesting case where it's like the conservatives now, like gay marriage, it's happened, everything's fine. The conservatives now all take the libertarian approach. But that's what if they really were small government people and really being principled, that's the approach that they should have taken years ago. So Rand Paul, who's one of the only politicians that I like in America, who's basically a libertarian, he should have been screaming about gay marriage for years, because that would have been the most honest thing that a libertarian could have done. Unfortunately, he's trying to get elected and then re-elected in Kentucky, and there's religious considerations and things like that. But yes, this crew of people that have come together, we're all over the place on the political map, we're all over the place on the philosophical map, we're all over the place on the literal map, all over the world. And I don't think we have all the answers, but what I do know is happening is there's a reason you guys know about us. There's a reason that I was at the Hammersmith Apollo in London last night, and 5,000 people were there to listen to Jordan Peterson tell them to clean their room. I mean, think about that. By the way, my room has never been cleaner. Spend time with this guy. My room is clean. My clothes mostly fit, although I've lost some weight. Now my suits are all big on me. But this is incredible. This is what I've been saying at the beginning of all these events with Peterson. There is a true revolution happening right now all over the world, and I think you guys are part of it because you get it already. But if this revolution wins, every revolution, I think, in the history of the world has been bloody. I think this is actually the chance where we may have a non-bloody revolution if we win. We're trying to free people's minds. That's it. And if you free people's minds, I think most people want to live with people who are a little different than them, who think a little bit differently, who can argue some things out. So and I would say this, if we lose, if this intellectual dark web crew loses, well then what are we caught between? We're going to be caught between identity politics on the left, and then we're going to be caught between the exact same version of that on the right. We will be caught between the portion of the right that I addressed earlier, which is the actual racist portion. I'm not even talking about Trump when I say that. I'm not talking about the average conservative. I'm talking about that very slim sliver of people who truly are racist, the KKK or whatever you want to call it, who again have no political power now. But if the group of us that are doing this, if we're not able to hold this position, I could see a whole slew of people be like, you know what? I am so sick of identity politics in the left, I'm actually going to make a really horrible choice. And that's what I'm trying to get people not to do. And I think in a lot of ways we're winning. I really do. We're getting more traction online than any of our counterparts on the other side of this thing. So I'm very hopeful, but I would say I'm a world-weary optimist more than anything else.
And kind of the idea of this revolution being steered by the internet, do you think there could ever be a point where instead of then freeing the mind, the internet does just fuel hysteria, which is kind of the antithesis of what?
Yeah, well, are you guys on Twitter? Because that thing is a nightmare. Yeah, there's a real problem with that, right? Like, I'm always for freedom, so I would always want more and more people to be able to voice their opinions however they can. Now, you don't have to listen to all opinions. So, for example, I have a lot of pink anime avatars that are telling me to go fuck myself every day on Twitter. And that's what the block button is for, and that's what the mute button is for. You don't have to listen to these people. But I'm not for banning these people. Now, I suppose if someone was doing, the Supreme Court has decided in America we don't have hate speech. So you guys have a different situation related to free speech here. But in effect, you can say whatever you want in America, and the government cannot come for you for that. That means you can say mean things about groups of people. What you can't do is call for violence. What you can't do is, yell fire in a crowded theater, things like that. And there are certain libel laws that I believe that we have and I believe are just, and it's extremely hard to prove libel, so they're very rarely ever used. But you're allowed to say mean things, and you don't have to listen to them. If you know what I mean? I mean, that's the beauty. You're allowed to close your computer every now and again. And I suspect that for most of you guys, if you were walking down the street here and somebody across the way started screaming at you and telling you how horrible you are, you'd probably just walk away. And that's what you should be doing online too. And I say that as someone that people say horrible things about me all day long, and it can be frustrating and annoying. And every now and again I want to fight back. I used to do it, but now I find just ignoring them is better. But your question about whether this will really lead to hysteria, I think is really legit. And I think that you guys as young people that are in college now, it's on you. You are wielding this awesome power literally in your pocket. You have the world in your pocket. And it's on you guys to figure out whether you will do good with that or bad with that or a little bit of both or whatever it is. So again, Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. And you guys have that power now to shape the world. I mean, think about it. You can communicate with people in a way that I'm not that much older than you guys. I'm 41. I guess that seems ancient. I had Sega Genesis when I was your age. So that's all right, one gamer here. But I'm not that much older than you. But the idea when I was in college that I could have communicated with, thousands and thousands of people across the world, there was no way to even remotely fathom that. I remember when I was in I think it was my sophomore year of college, I remember in the dorm room, some kid started screaming down the hallway that he was on the internet, and he's on the internet screaming about it, and a bunch of us ran in there. I swear on my life this is true. We look at his computer and it says Yankees 3, Royals 1. So it's a baseball score, Yankees 3, Royals 1, and I remember turning to him and I said, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Now really think about how things change. You guys now all know me because of the internet, right? So I would say that the hysteria or the being mean to people or any of that stuff, it's the price you pay for freedom. And it's on you to figure out how to negotiate that in your life. But yes, could it make conspiracy theories travel faster? Can it get people to be more enraged at people that they don't know? Can it make us scared? Can it make us fearful of people that we shouldn't be fearful of? And all of those things, it absolutely can. And at the exact same time, it can do incredible amounts of good and break down barriers in ways that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago.
Okay, thank you. And on the topic of giving power to the people, I'll now love to
Wow, that
open
was
it up
quick. All right.
to the audience for a Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please wait for the microphone and stand up once you've said your question. So the member in the black polo shirt on the aisle. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So you said initially that the left seems to be very good at branding their ideas. Conversely, presumably that means that you think that people on the right are not that good. So why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of reasons for it. I mean, I think generally, if the basic ideas of the right are personal freedom and liberty and individualism, that all kind of sounds old or something. It does, progress sounds good. There's just something about words. And if you say I'm for progress, it sounds good just when you initially hear it. Saying I'm for freedom. Well, all the people that I've talked about on the left, when they say they're for progress, they're also in their minds, they're for freedom also. I don't think that freedom comes from the state. I think you are born free. This is a place where I have a little difference with conservatives. So conservatives generally will say that you have God-given rights. For me, it's not that important. I got into this a little bit with Ben about religion. I don't think it doesn't matter whether it's God-given or if you take a more humanistic approach. It's your right as a human being. You are born into this world free. The government is supposed to protect your rights, not give them to you. We happen to live in countries that do a pretty damn good job of it. Not a perfect job, but a pretty damn good job of it. I think generally speaking, the right has not articulated their ideas well because they lost the culture war. And this is what Ben Shapiro talks about a lot, of course. It's what Milo was really talking about. They sort of said, all right, we're just going to exist in the political realm, and we're going to try to fight for whatever it is, limited government and states' rights and those things in the political sense, but we're going to give up on the media, we're going to give up on Hollywood, things of that nature. And I think partly why you guys probably dig what a lot of us are doing now is that we've started to actually take the culture back. And the ideas of leftism and of collectivism, I mean, they've ruined comedy. All of these people, it's so funny. I see all these comics that are constantly just endlessly screaming about Trump and angry at everything. And it's like, to me, George Carlin was the greatest comic who ever lived. And it's like, if George Carlin was alive, and I'm good friends with his daughter, Kelly, who's been on my show a couple times, who's a wonderful free speech advocate. If George Carlin or Richard Pryor were alive right now, do you think they'd be screaming about Trump, or would they be winning with comedy? I mean, they'd be winning with comedy. And that's what we need more of. And I think that it's actually becoming cool to believe in some conservative or libertarian or classical liberal values. And I think it's a bit of a branding game, but it's one I'm willing to fight.
Okay, if we can go to the member in front, like the pattern shirt. Just in front. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I was just wondering, with the Intellectual Darkweb, do you not think that the proximity with which some people like yourself and Sam Harris to people like Ben Shapiro, and even, I know you might not include Milo yourself in the Intellectual Darkweb, but
yeah,
that proximity with those kinds of thinkers might do more to deter people from the left from engaging with the ideas than they would.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because it's a tough one and I'm going to get it constantly now. And I said in the article that I don't think it's for me to, look, I want to say this right. I don't think it's for me to define what this thing is. I happen to be someone who's been thrust into it, but that doesn't make me the arbiter of who's in it. We don't have a card, you know what I mean? Like, we don't have a club, we don't have a nice room with books like you guys. We should, right? That seems like we should. Can you guys get us a room here? Like, that would be. This seems like the right place to do it. Like, we should be meeting here. Like, that would be great. But I don't think it's for me to define exactly who should be in it. And you also have to understand that we all have slightly different roles in this. So I'm an interviewer. Now, as an interviewer, I'm going to talk to some people that are going to have some uncomfortable ideas. And within that, I will do the best I can, but every now and again, I might fail on something. Something might get by me. I may not, we're a small operation, but we're growing. There could be some piece of history of a guest of mine that I don't know about where they genuinely said something truly racist. And if I don't question them on that's on me. So in this case, Joe Rogan and I have, I think, a tougher job, because we have to sort of give the boundaries by who we're willing to talk to. Now, if you take some of the other guys, I mean, Brett Weinstein, he is a brilliant biologist. His brother Eric is a brilliant mathematician. But they don't have to talk to anyone that they don't necessarily want to talk to by default. So that makes how we all will police this a little bit different. And yes, I know I've talked to people that anger some of these other people. And I know that I probably will do it again in the future. And all I can tell you is I will always do my best to get what these people are really thinking out of them, and then let the chips fall where they may. I don't want to be authoritarian in this regard. I want to, if you're not calling for mass murder or some really, really horrific stuff, I basically want to let your ideas out there because I do believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. But that being said, I get the counter argument on this, that if we have, I could do the Uncle Ben line again, but I won't, but if we have this power now, which I really believe we have, that do we have to guard it in a special way, right? You guys don't let everyone hear at Oxford Union. There's a reason for that, right? So maybe we will have to police it in a way that isn't my default position as a human, but I happen to be around a lot of bright people who maybe think different, and that's what the whole thing's all about, right? We're having those discussions right now. I had dinner just 2 nights ago in London with Douglas Murray and Majid Nawaz and Jordan Peterson, and we talked about this exact thing. So I think it's a work in progress, and I don't need to agree with them all on all of this, and maybe they'll pull me in one direction, and maybe I'll pull them in the other direction.
May I come back on that very briefly, or is there not time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I'll try to do it quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that there's always enough done within these conversations between people who are in these talks to actually challenge each other. So, like Sam Harris did quite a good job of challenging Jordan Peterson, and they obviously had that really awful podcast. It was like 3 hours long on the definition of truth.
Yeah, that was rough.
But I feel like Jordan Peterson's done, there are lots of interesting ideas he has, but there are lots of things he says which are very contentious and haven't always been challenged very much by some people in your group, as it were. Yeah. And I think that if more was to be done there to challenge from within, that could also be helpful.
I promise you that I will do my best to be part of that. I mean, when I've had Jordan on, a lot of it I'm learning as you guys are learning. You know what I mean? That really is the truth. I don't go into any of my interviews with some sort of preconceived notion of things or anything else. Sometimes when I'm preparing for something, I have to know like a chronological order of something, or I need to know a specific statistic or a date or whatever it is. But when Jordan comes in and talks about these big ideas, my default position is always, I truly want to be right there with him, look him in the eyes and really try to follow the line of logic and take the conversation wherever it goes. I think the more we all do this thing, we will challenge each other more. I can even feel that because of this article, this thing's changed already. We all just got leveled up. We're going to have extra scrutiny on us. And this is I truly believe this is a really special group of intellectually curious people that are willing to change their opinions. But you're right, the only way we're going to do it is if we challenge each other. So if it hasn't been done to your liking yet, I would just say stay tuned. Yeah.
Okay, could we go to the member in the green polo neck? As leader in the front. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about your opinion about the transformation of conservative views from, for example, the 60s and even up to the 90s to today, especially given the increasing scrutiny even on very liberal and left-wing ideas, and how it's been shifting more towards that in mainstream media and in other general visible areas of communication.
So I think your question is that the conservative movement has incorporated some liberal ideas. Was that the thrust of it?
No, more about the the general shifts in the conservative movement from the 90s and today, in the context of the increasing scrutiny from the far left or even illiberal ideas.
So I would say one thing I'm very pleased about that's happening on the right and with conservatives in general is there is a movement within conservatism to be more libertarian. Now, of course, that's what I want to happen. So for example, I go to a lot of events with Turning Point USA, which is the largest college conservative group in America. And I go up there and I talk about being gay married and for legalizing pot, and I'm for euthanasia, and I'm against the death penalty, and I'm for, I'm for some level of public education, as I said earlier, and a slew of things that are against mainstream conservatism. Guess what? Without fail, every time I get a standing ovation. Now, that shows you that for some reason right now, the right, conservatives, are more okay with diversity of ideas. Why do they keep bringing me to these things? People say, Rubin's a token for them. And that's the most belittling, insulting. It takes a lot to get me insulted. But that's the most, I have capacity over my own mind and the decisions I make. And I go to these things and I meet black, gay people who are conservatives. I mean, every which way. I hate giving those examples because it's exactly the reverse of everything else I stand for. But I meet truly diverse people in the diversity of ideas. And I think this is where conservatism, where maybe in the 90s it was really caught up with Christian conservatism, and I think this is where George W. Bush did a real disservice to conservatism, where they made gay marriage a wedge issue, where they could have led on this. Even right now in America, we have, some states have made marijuana legal. I'm all for the states deciding, right? That should be, if you live in Colorado and you want to smoke pot, smoke pot. If Texas decides not to do it, then don't live in Texas if that's important to you, or not important to you, as it were. But the conservatives, unfortunately, in the 90s really got caught up in all the social stuff. They're screaming about video games cause violence, and they're against gay marriage, and you're for small government, but you're also telling people they can't smoke what they want to smoke. I mean, none of it makes sense. What I'm pleased to see is that as the libertarian streak really takes root in the conservative movement, I think that will lead them to greater truth. I think that it'll lead them to greater tolerance in the right sense, and I think it'll lead them to greater diversity in the right sense. So I'm actually very hopeful on that side. And then just on the other side of that token, I would say on the left, there is no diversity. I would love, I swear to you, get one of these progressive organizations or democratic organizations or leftist organizations to invite me or any of the other guys that we've mentioned here. Get them, I'll gladly give the same speech. I don't even prepare. I mean, I come up there and I do my thing. And I will gladly say the exact same things. And yet, despite all of the so-called leftist stuff that I just said I'm for, I don't get any invites. So one side actually is saying tolerance and one side's actually preaching it right now. Doesn't make either one of them perfect, but we've seen movement.
If we could go to the member in the front row in the white t-shirt.
You spoke a lot about freedom and freedom to choose and commerce, and I wanted your thought about the famous libertarian Ross Ulbricht, who founded the Silk Road.
Who founded the what?
Silk Road was basically the biggest marketplace on the darknet. If it's too esoteric, never mind. It's essentially
I don't know.
A market when you can buy and sell everything with Bitcoin, which is a currency not regulated by country, and then you can probably buy and sell fair trade cocaine and prescription meds the concept is good, but in the libertarian pure sense.
Yeah.
Your take on that?
So I don't know that I can comment about him specifically, but this is what I referenced earlier about the dark web, and yes, through Bitcoin and crypto, you will be able to basically do whatever you want online, and you'll be able to buy things untracked and all of those things. I would say basically, again, this is where my default position would be on more freedom. Yeah, that's good. That is just good. Are people going to do shady things? Are people going to do illegal things? Are people probably going to do immoral things? And the list goes on and on. Yes. But if you believe in the basic ideas of libertarianism, and you believe what's yours is yours, and you want to spend your money as you see fit, and you don't want the government taking more of your money to waste on things that maybe you don't want them to waste on, like extra bombs and all sorts of other things, well, then I would say that crypto is a really great answer to that. And I would also say that whether you like it or not, it's happening. And you can either sort of get on board and accept that this is a reality. And you know what? It's a little bit sort of like the question that the other guy asked about the Intellectual Darkweb. When things start leveling up, then sort of new rules get put into place. Now, I don't really want rules around crypto. And I have a little bit of Bitcoin, and hopefully it keeps moving, right? I don't want rules really, but eventually I find that these things sort of start managing themselves. So I wouldn't want the government to come in, and again, I would say the price you pay for freedom is that some bad stuff is going to happen along the way, and that's a price that you should be willing to pay to make decisions for yourself.
Just for the protocol here, I'm happily paying.
Yeah. Yeah, great. That's what it's all about.
Okay. If we go to the member in the tie on the edge of the aisle.
I'll try to be a little quicker because I see a lot of hands. Yeah.
I was wondering what you do think of religion, because Sir Roger Scruton was here not too long ago, and he was talking about the fact there's two parts of religion. There's the believing, and then there's the membership part, this community. And communities have really been fractured. People don't know their neighbors anymore, and then this polarization happens where people make politics their religion. And there's that part that I would like you to comment on.
Yeah.
And maybe also I'd like to comment that is the internet not just perpetuating this escape into the internet and away from the community?
I'm glad you asked that question because I don't talk about this that often. I've talked about it a little bit with Shapiro and I think maybe with Sam Harris. In terms of my own belief on belief, I have tried hard my entire life to believe in something that I can't prove. I've tried. I mean, I went to Mount Sinai in Egypt where they tell you that that's where Moses got the 10 Commandments. And I was your age. I was early 20s when your mind is open and ready. I was ready for a religious experience. And I went up there with the intentions of having some sort of religious experience. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. I've spent about 10 days in Amsterdam eating mushrooms every day, and I still didn't have a religious experience. I mean, I've been open to that, but I would say my mind is maybe not, I think it has a little bit to do with hardwiring. And so I don't believe in things that I can't prove. But I will say this, for a while I did say I was an atheist. And the more I said it, I realized that I didn't like saying it. Really, that's what happened. And I believe in something that I can't quite explain. And I would say that Jordan Peterson's doing a great job of this, actually. And when I'm on tour with him now, and I hear this type of question a lot, what he's getting to is that you can believe in all sorts of rational things, but there might be underpinnings of stories and truths they're not empirical truths because science proved them, but they're truths that supersede that. I like that line of thinking. So I hope that sort of answered the first part of the question. And as for the second part, community is hugely important. Whether you get community from a religious group or from a political group or from playing sports or video games or whatever else you do, we need that. And yes, that does seem to be fraying a little bit because everyone's fighting online all the time. But at the same time, people are playing, Warcraft with people that live 15,000 miles away from them. So you got to find community however you can find it. It seems like you guys have done a pretty good job of it here. But that's what it's all about. And I think actually, perhaps for the big group of people that find community out of religion, but then don't want to have to ignore their intellect to do that, I think there'll be all sorts of new ways because of the internet to find community. I think that answer was a little messy, but I think we kind of got there.
Thank you. Okay, if we could go to the member in the black shirt, just.
Hi, Mr. Rubin. Big fan of your show, so thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Just back to your argument on kind of the whole affirmative action and disproportionate representation. While I fully agree with it, I was wondering if I could play a little bit of devil's advocate and tell me what you would reply to someone who would say, well, that's true, but part of the reason of this disproportionality is because we live in a society that still suffers from the historic residue of racism. And while it is true that kind of to fully cure this would be to go at a local level, that's not fast enough. That type of progress isn't fast enough. And so nowadays in the politics of kind of getting things done and people vote for people who can get that affirmative action, that change done, how would you still kind of come back with your point about being local?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would do is, I hope some of you have seen this, I would send them to my video with Larry Elder, which I suspect some of you guys have seen. This is when I was still a lefty, and I asked Larry Elder, who happens to be black, he's a conservative, I asked him about systemic racism, and he basically beat me senseless. I mean, it is a violent video on YouTube. He beat me senseless with facts. Systemic racism, let me just talk about America here, so I'm not going to talk about the UK here. Systemic racism does not exist. There are no laws in America, meaning the system. Doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. Racism exists. There are people who are racist, and you should do everything you can to show them that their ideas are wrong, and that you should not be judging someone based on their race, of course. But the idea that there is systemic racism, meaning that there are laws in place that treat black people differently or Asian people differently or white people differently, simply doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean that we can still do better on certain things. So for example, often black people will be incarcerated longer for simple crimes that if a white person committed won't be. Now that has to do more with socioeconomic reasoning, which is why I would be for, if you can get an economy that's as free as possible, you will have more and more people, regardless of the color of their skin, being able to partake in an economy. But, it's so funny because this is where the Democrats have sort of owned a lot of the minority communities. And I think Candace Owens and Kanye, believe it or not, are the leaders out. I mean, I really think they are. But if you think about this, if you think about the worst places in the United States for black people to live in terms of economics, in terms of shootings, it's Chicago, it's Ferguson, it's Atlanta. It's these places that have been run by Democrats almost exclusively for 80 years. Yet the Democrats keep saying we're for black people. So it's sort of like saying I'm a progressive, I'm for a progressive. It sounds good. Well, I'm for black people. Everyone's for black, unless you're a true racist, you're for black people the same way you should be for everybody else. So they've tricked you into thinking, Chicago, I would guess, someone should check the numbers on this, but I'm going to guess about 50 to 80 people, black people, were shot in Chicago this past weekend. You never hear about that because it's mostly black on black crime. Well, if the Democrats are so good at fixing these problems, why is it that in their cities it's always the worst? And it's because they create these incentives that are actually disincentives. And if you give people things, it becomes very hard to not want those things anymore. And I can give you, I know that anecdotal stuff isn't always the best way, but I can give you one very good example. My sister lives on the Upper West Side of New York City. It's a nice area. She pays a ton to live in a nice area with a doorman building in New York City. A good portion of her building, I think it might be 50%, is rent subsidized, meaning that they're keeping rents low for certain people of certain ethnicities to live there, to live in a very nice area in a very nice building. Now imagine if that was you for a minute, and the guy next to you was paying $3,000 to live in the apartment, and you are paying $400. Would you ever not want that to be? You wouldn't. It's just the truth. And then it gives you a disincentive to make more money, because once you make more money, they're going to take away your benefit. And then what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to leave your nice area, and you're going to have to move 100 blocks north, if not out of the city altogether. So all of this is exactly where the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I don't believe these people are evil. I don't believe that the Democrats that put these yes, some of them I think are evil and want to control people, but that's a small sliver. I think the average person who's voting for these policies, they think they're doing the right thing. And this is where I would say watch my interview with Larry Elder, and then especially watch my interview with the great Thomas Sowell, and read every book by Thomas Sowell, and understand that every time they have tried to make things better for specific people, they make it worse for everybody.
Thank you. Unfortunately, because of time, we only have time for one more question. Do you want to choose the final person?
Well, who feels that it's a really good ending question? All right, there's two hands pointing at one hand over there.
So waving his card. Yeah, there we go.
Thanks. I've been following you since you did your sugar videos back in the day, 4 years ago.
Oh God, Jesus, I'm sorry about that.
And I've been bursting to ask you these two questions.
Yes.
After the Israel-Palestine debate on the Young Turks,
yeah,
I think because when Cenk Uygur came here, I asked him, so I want to get your take on this. There were so many cuts in that video, and there was so much, there was kind of Cenk, Jimmy Dore, Steve-O were kind of accusing you of being a child killer or something, or wanting to be a child killer. I want to know what it was like in the studio after that, and what it was like after the studio when you debated Ben Mankiewicz on the Charlie Hebdo attacks. Man, because your face after that was, you were just looking kind of stoic, just kind of looking off into the distance.
Wow, all right, this is good.
Pure anger.
This is good, this was the right guy. All right, I'm glad you asked this. I don't think I've ever addressed either one of these publicly, so let me say this. So basically, just for the people that didn't see the video, so it was during, I believe it was the Gaza war of the summer of 2015, and I was on air with, it was me, Cenk, Jimmy Dore, Steve-O, who is the CEO of the company, Cenk, who is Steve is the COO of the company, or at least was at the time. Cenk is the CEO, Jimmy Dore, and Anna Kasparian. And all of them were taking what I consider to be a quite radical, but leftist, unfortunately, position on without even the specifics of what was happening in Gaza that day. They were taking what I think is a pretty radical position generally on Israel and the Palestinians. The first thing you have to know about that debate, and I would welcome you guys all to watch it, is that I was arguing with my bosses. So it wasn't that I was just arguing with couple, it was basically 4-on-1, but it wasn't that I was just arguing with 4 people. I have no problem with that. I was arguing with 2 guys that were my bosses that employ me. So you guys are gonna have jobs one day, you'll find out. It's uncomfortable when that happens. But I had no problem saying anything that I said. But what I realized more than anything else in that, and I actually look back on it now, I'm really glad you asked this. I really think it's one of my best moments on camera, because not only did everything that I said was true, but it was very obvious to me, and it became very obvious in subsequent conversations after that without naming any specific person at the moment, because I try not to do that, they had no idea what history was. That there's never been a nation called Palestine, that before 1967, the West Bank was part of Jordan and Gaza was part of Egypt. There was a complete lack of acknowledgement of peace offers and a zillion other things that historically I kept bringing up. And I don't even remember exactly how far I got into it on that, but just basic truths that it became obvious to me that they weren't going to accept, and that they had just picked right people and wrong people. And I think it's a horrible way to argue. It was extremely uncomfortable doing that. I mean, it really was, but when I walked out of there, I felt really proud of what I did, and I think that it's a good lesson for any of you to whether even if you disagree with everything I just said there, I don't know or really care about what your opinions are on that specific issue, that you should just fight for what you believe in, honestly. And I think I really did that there. But it was extremely uncomfortable, and doing that with your bosses, but also that I was also realizing, and I knew this in advance, that I was arguing with people who did not know facts. And that's why Ben's line about facts don't care about your feelings is so important. Know facts, whatever you're arguing about, know facts. And then very quickly on the other one, the other was a few months later, and this was, I think that day was when I officially decided to leave TYT. It was, I think, the day after Charlie Hebdo, and I was on air, and I don't remember who the other person was. Do you remember? It was Ben, and Jimmy was on with us also. And
I think it was Michael, what's his name?
Michael Schur, maybe?
Michael Schur, Michael
yeah,
Schur, yeah.
So I don't even remember him being there, honestly, but Ben was on and Jimmy, and basically Ben was taking the position that you cannot draw cartoons if it's going to offend people. This is the antithesis of everything that I've said here, and I hope everything that you guys believe. It is up to you if you want to offend people, and if you offend people, they might do bad things to you. But it is your mind, it is your reasoning and your logic that will allow you to do anything you want in this world. And the idea that you would allow someone to say to you, I'm not going to draw something because it might offend you. Well, guess what? The next thing they're going to say to you is, all right, well, I guess you probably shouldn't say that either. And after that, you know what? You probably shouldn't marry the person you want to marry either. You cannot give these people an inch when it comes to your own sovereign independence over your own mind. So what happened in that was Ben was saying that we shouldn't do these cartoons. And I genuinely couldn't believe it, because at the time he was a friend of mine. I mean, none of those guys will talk to me anymore because I'm a crazy right-wing maniac. But what really snapped it for me was that, and I'm going to get these numbers a little bit off, but Ben started pounding the desk and he started screaming. And this is what lefties do all the time, because they can't win with facts, so they think if they yell the most, or if they use crocodile tears, or if they scream at you, that you will somehow think they're right. And that's been really effective in the media. And it's why you don't see people on our side doing it. It's why they're our side. I wish I didn't say that, but you don't see generally people who are a little more open to ideas doing it. But Ben was banging his hands on the desk and said, he goes, 99%, correct me if I'm wrong, 99% of the Charlie Hebdo covers were against Muslims. And I said, Ben, I don't know what the answer to that is, but I am sure it's not 99%. Do you guys know what the answer is on that? It's something like 3 out of 497 covers. There were more about, there were more about Orthodox Jews and plenty mostly about the Pope and Christianity, which of course everyone can mock and no one says you're a Christianophobe. So, but that moment, I was already pissed because of the Sam Harris stuff, and Cenk sort of lost his mind related to that. And I had already been thinking about leaving, but that moment, I remember I actually called Jimmy after, because I was like, I'm trying not to curse. I was like, I just could not believe it happened. I could not believe that I was sitting with someone that's supposed to be the tolerant people that would hand over their faculties to let someone who would just as easily have them dead decide what they're allowed to draw or not. And then the fake bravado and all that. So I appreciate that you've been with me for a long time, because those are two important moments in everything that led me here. So thanks. Yeah, thank you.
And I'd like to thank you so much, Dave, for
well,
such
thank you.
engaging
This
talk.
was an absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you.
I'm
And you
honored
can
to
all
be
join
here.
us.